Hey everybody, today we're going to talk about Beowulf, translated by Seamus Heaney, and it's a great translation. It really brought to life the ideals of Beowulf, the heroism, the aspects of what it takes to truly triumph over evil and life and death itself. So the story starts off in Denmark, and there's a king named Hrothgar who settled in his land. He's a happy guy, he has his land going good. He built this palace. He has a mead hall where they all celebrate every night. Everybody goes and they drink and they have a good time. They light, they dance, they sing, all the good stuff, right? It's a typical happy town. But little do they know, nearby in a cave, there's a monster demon dwindling called Grendel. And Grendel is actually a biblical descendant of Cain, from the story of Cain and Abel. And so you kind of see who the demographic was of the people when the story was written. And it's an Old English text, so it's all, post-Bible, so it's all, very religious based. And so this descendant of Cain, Grendel, hates thy neighbor. He hates everything that's going on in the meat hall. He hates the happiness, the lights, the singing. Grendel starts getting really upset, and in Grendel's nature, Grendel decides, I'm gonna start killing these people. I don't like these people celebrating, so I'm gonna kill them. So a couple nights pass, and Grendel finally decides to take the plunge. Grendel goes in and murders everybody in the meat hall, and everyone's dead. And the next morning, the king is startled. He's scared and terrified, and they clean up the bodies, and they don't know what's going on. They find out, okay, we gotta see what's going on in this town because something's murdering everybody. They start playing it safe, but then after a while they start celebrating again. Everyone starts going back into the meat hall, and then over a couple nights and over and over and over again, as they soon realize, Grendel does not stop murdering people. Grendel every night comes into the meat hall and starts ripping people apart and killing them. And so this becomes a problem. And King Hrothgar decides, I need to find a way to stop this. I need to find a way to stop this monster, but he has no idea how. And word of this town spread. The rumors started spreading across the lands, and enter Beowulf's team. And there's a great warrior across the water who hears of the story and says, I gotta go help. He says, I gotta go help this king out. So he assembles his men and they sail on their way over there. So they get there, and Beowulf introduces himself to the king. He says, my name is Beowulf. I've come to help you. I heard you have a problem with demons, and I wanna step in and lend a hand. And the king tells him, he's like, you don't need an introduction. He's like, I know who you are. I was a friend of your father's. He's like, and you have a place to stay here. He's like, stay here for the night, and I appreciate your help. He's like, and you are already a friend of mine. And Beowulf is good, they set their armor down, him and his men, they start to drink, they start to laugh, and they start to get excited, and they get ready for the big fight that's coming. So after Beowulf beats the king, they have a dinner. They have a celebratory dinner, and they all eat, they dine, and they enjoy their free time before the battle begins. And the king's trusty advisor he doesn't like Beowulf. He starts making these sly remarks. He's like, are you really the one that's going to save us? Are you really, he starts questioning him. He starts asking him, he's like, didn't you lose that, swimming match against your friend? Like, how are you supposed to be this great hero and you can't even properly swim? Beowulf tells everyone at the dinner hall, he says, yes. He's like, I did not win that racing match. He's like, I was racing my friend and we wanted to have this competition to see who would win. We were always at each other's throats. We grew up competing. He's like, and I wanted to see who could win in this match. He's like, but I realized that there was something pulling us down, that there was something pulling him down, and I remembered that there was monsters in this lake that would actually kill people. He's like, so I didn't want that to happen to anybody, so I decided I should fight off the monsters. And he's like, I eventually made sure I took care of the root of the problem, so that way the monsters will never hurt anybody else again. He's like, so my friend did win. He's like, and I did lose that fight. He's like, but I was taking care of other things, and I had different priorities other than that. And he owned up to it. He says, yeah, I did lose it. He's like, but only because I was doing something more heroic and more courageous and more noble than winning a little competition. And so the trusty advisor was kind of like, he sat back down and started sulking. I was like, you know what, whatever, screw this guy. I'm done. I don't care about this guy at all, whatever. And Beowulf ended up looking like a bigger hero in the eyes of all the people at the dinner table. Now they all fall asleep and they don't have any of their armor on them. And then in comes creeping Grendel. Grendel opens the door and starts walking in and starts, waking people up. And people find out and they're all in a drunken, sleepy haze. And they all start fighting and, wrestling and punching and screaming. And then Grendel comes to Beowulf. And Beowulf wakes up and he grabs Grendel by the arm. And Grendel's surprised that Grendel can't rip the grip off of a mere human, and it baffles him. And Beowulf keeps pulling and pulling, and he eventually rips off the arm of Grendel. Now Grendel, in a disadvantage, decides, I'm not gonna fight this battle one-handed, I'm gonna bleed out. So then he leaves and he flies out the door and he runs away and he goes in his cave and he hides and he sulks and he licks his wounds. And the team, they're happy, they're ecstatic, and they use the arm and they symbolize it as a trophy. This arm is now the representation of the battle won against Grendel. So they use it and they hang it up and they show it off to the town the next day. And the king has a gathering of people, like a parade, saying, here's Beowulf and here's, my trusty advisor, and this is the arm, and this is proof that the monster is dead. And everyone cheers and they're happy and they're ecstatic and they all think it's a really good time. So they think everything is going good for a while. But then after a couple, it doesn't really specify, but after a while, Grendel's mother hears about what happened to her son, and Grendel says, I'm not gonna let this happen to my son without any repercussions. So she decides to start taking on the people. She goes inside the meat hall at night and she takes the arm back and she goes back to her place and she kills a few people on the way. Now Beowulf and the team, they start finding out what happened to the arm, what happened to these dead people, and they find out it's Grendel's mother. And so Beowulf says, we gotta go find her. We gotta go find her, we gotta go attack her, we gotta make sure that we win this battle, right? It's us versus them. So Grendel's mother was hiding out in her home, and her home is underwater, and Beowulf and the men are searching and searching for her, and eventually they find her, and Beowulf says, I have to go down there and I have to go get back the stuff. He's like, I have to go kill her. So he jumps down, goes into the water, and he reaches the bottom and he starts fighting her, and they get into this big old, battle, and he tries to cut her, but he can't cut her because, he's in her territory, and she's not human, and she can't really get cut up like other humans can with normal skin. So he finds out his weapon is useless, and he finds a blade lying around in the middle of a fight, and he uses it to stab her with it, and that blade actually ends up harming her. It kills her, and the blade eventually was made of magic, so it ends up, disintegrating in his very hands. So Beowulf goes back up to the surface and he tells everyone, I killed Grendel's mother, I killed Grendel and his mother, here's the arm to prove it, and here's all this, here's all the proof. And the town, they praise him and they say, you're a hero, you're a god amongst men. And the king tells him, I'm going to give you land. He's like, I'm going to give you riches, I'm going to give you people, I'm going to give you land. He's like, you are now, from hero to king. And it's that progression, So the book jumps 50 years later after that. The book jumps and it says that Beowulf was a good king, he's more calm now, he's more mature, he's dealt with a lot more things, and he's just relaxed, and he's ran a good town. It says that he was a good king to all of his people. Until one day, one of his townspeople, they decide to go into a dragon's lair, of course, because there's dragons in caves nearby, and they hoard stuff like they normally do, gold and riches and treasure. And one person decides to get greedy, curiosity gets the best of him. He goes in there and takes a piece of the dragon's money. The dragon doesn't like this. The dragon gets mad and wakes up, realizes there's a piece of gold missing, piece of treasure, throws the rage, starts flying around, burning things, killing people, trying to make a point, trying to say, nobody touches my things and I'm going to get it back. The people go to Beowulf, they tell him, there's a dragon destroying the town, and he's like, well, let me put on my old battle gear that I haven't worn in 50 years. He gets all of his stuff, and he gets his men, he gets 11 of his men, and he says, come on, let's go to the dragon's lair and find him. They all go and assemble, and outside of the cave, he tells them, he's like, I'm going to take this dragon on one-on-one. He's like, I want to prove my worth. He's like, I want to prove that to myself that I can fight this dragon one-on-one. So he goes in there with the shield and his sword, and he goes up to the dragon, the dragon's back at home now, and the dragon starts, throwing fire at him and breathing on him, and he has his shield and he braces it up and he's holding, and he goes in there, and every time he gets close and he tries to cut it, the dragon starts breathing fire on him again, and he just has to hide behind the shield and wait, and he finally gets a chance to cut the dragon, but the sword doesn't do anything to it. The scales are too tough and the sword is just end up being useless. So he's like, dang it. So he's just there stuck with the shield, and the guys were watching from outside the cave, and one of the young guys, Winslow, I think his name was, Winslow, I'll put it on the screen somewhere. He's like, he tells all the other men, he said, we can't just sit by and watch Beowulf as he's fighting this dragon one-on-one to protect us. He's like, he gave us land, he gave us money, he gave us, anything we ever wanted. We're supposed to be his loyal, trusty allies, and we're gonna just sit back and watch him fight this dragon. He's like, I know he said he wanted to do it alone. He's like, but we have to step up to the plate and protect him the way that he protected us, and give him the respect that he gave to us when we were in need of it. So he said, I can't wait any longer. He's like, and I'm gonna go in there and rush in. And so this young guy, all the other guys stay behind, but this young guy, he runs in there, and poor little guy, he only has a wooden shield. So he gets close, and by the time he gets close enough to feel the fire starts burning through his wooden shield. He holds it up and it just starts eating away at it, and it starts disintegrating. And Beowulf sees him, and he grabs him and he pulls him inside, and he pulls him behind his shield. So now he's blocking the two of them at the same time, and they're both just sitting there behind the fire. And there's a moment where the dragon opens its mouth, and bites Beowulf on the shoulder. And during this time, the little guy scoots to the side and goes to the belly of the beast, and he plunges the sword inside of it. The beast gets mad, and while he has his jaws, his giant, dragon-headed jaws on top of Beowulf, he uses this opportunity to, he's behind the scales. He grabs a sword and plunges it into the dragon's head. And these two attacks combined take down the dragon. And the dragon starts dying and withering and breathing, and just starts, it starts dying. Little did they know, though, that dragon actually had poisonous, venom in its saliva. And it starts eating into Beowulf's wounds, and he starts feeling, and he starts dying, and he starts going away, and he calls the young gentleman over, and he tells him, come here, and he explains to him, he's like, all of this will now be yours. He's like, you showed me true honor, courage, and respect. He's like, I'm going to leave everything to you. He's like, I only have a few wishes, though. He's like, you will now be the new king. He's like, because you showed me everything that I would have liked to have been shown. He's like, I want you to build me a burial ground. He's like, I want you to build me a burial ground out by the sea, near this tomb, near this cave, so that everyone could see my tomb, so that I will live on forever, so that people will know my story. He didn't want to die yet. He wanted to continue his legacy of being known. He wanted to continue the stories of Beowulf. What better place to put a burial ground of a great guy who slayed the dragon than the spot where he slayed the dragon, where a bunch of people can see it when they sail by. And so he told him, this is my dying wish, and I want you to respect it. And so the other 11 men that were just watching outside the cave, they finally come back in, and he's so mad at them, and he tells them, he's like, I can't believe you guys just stood out there. I can't believe you guys just went out there and just did absolutely nothing. He's like, you guys are worthless. He's like, so I'm gonna be the new king now. Beowulf said we have to make a burial for him, this great big pyre and this great big mourning area. He's like, and we gotta build it. And so he instructs them all to do it, and they end up building it for him, and he ends up becoming the king, and that's the end of the story. And it's a story about courage and doing the right thing, nobility, and how one upgrades in life. He started off as the son of a great guy, and he lived up to the expectations. He killed a few people. He had his trials and tribulations. He jumped hoops over them, and Beowulf ended up becoming a better man, just like how that little guy at the end was. And it's a good story. It's straight to the point. It's really short. I think it was about 100 pages long, and it was like in poetry style, so it had very little margins in the book. But I think it was a fun book. I think a lot of people would really get to enjoy it, and it's not overly dramatic or overly graphic, so even the younger audience can enjoy it. But anyway, that's the story of Beowulf. That's my little summary of it. There's not really much to review. It's pretty bare bones. It's pretty much just a hero who goes through life, and he uses his godlike strengths to get ahead, and he upgrades himself throughout life. And so it's more of a good story, but it's really famous because it teaches us a lot about Old English and the Anglo-Saxon version of the way they wrote, the way they thought about life, the things that they believed in, with the whole Cain and Abel part of it. And yeah, I think it's a fun book. If anybody is into epic poetry and wants a fast read, I think this is a good one. It really falls in line with the Iliad, the Odyssey, the Epic of Gilgamesh. It really feels like one of those books in itself. So that's all about it I had to say. Take care, guys.